Most
all three in one room.
I know, one room. Maybe more.
Yeah, right?
I want to thank everyone for attending this session and joining us today. We are pleased to have these excellent speakers to discuss this important topic. Please note that we encourage everyone to scan into the session. This is a requirement to obtain continuing education credit, and we would also like to have accurate attendance counts for each session. If you leave the session for more than 20 minutes early, we will need to scan you out due to CE requirements. And please note, if you have to step out of the room for more than 20 minutes, we cannot scan you back in. Let's begin the program.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's great to be with all of you and be with a group of social workers, and after a wonderful couple of days talking about obviously the work that we do and the causes that we're about, and how we can go about doing them effectively. My name is Matthew Watson, and my co-presenter is Brandy Shufutinsky, and our third presenter, Shaquem Holmes. He's not available today, wasn't able to make it, and so we will present his content, and we look forward to sharing that with you. There's definitely a spirit, if you will. Reverend Dr. Barber yesterday mentioned that in what we do, and I appreciated how he articulated that there's definitely a spirit about this, and I hope that as we present, and then as we engage in a little bit of dialogue and discussion in question and answer, that spirit of openness and curiosity, and but also candor and being authentic and goodwill, that can pervade everything that we do and can permeate everything that we do in our discussion today. One of the things that I think is just important is that we believe that people are inherently good. Now, not all, obviously, we don't have to be naive, but recognize that those who have political views or viewpoints that are different than our own, that we can engage them in effective ways. And there are some things that have kind of come up over the last few days that I think will be helpful to emphasize. And I wanted to just emphasize a few of those. I really appreciated Reverend Dr. Barber's statement that America needs more social work. And I really believe that. Political work is part of social work, but social work is broader than political work, and it's obviously broader than partisan work as well. And so we want to make sure that our approach, that we focus on the challenge that we're trying to address, rather than engaging, partisan barbs or those kinds of things. I want to share with you just briefly a little bit about how this project that I'll describe to you today, how it got started. A few years ago, there was, actually it's about 5 years ago, there was on the My NASW website, there's a listserv where members can ask questions and engage in some discussions, and someone asked, can somebody be a Christian and be a real social worker, or can somebody be somebody have conservative values and be a real social worker? Because this person who posted that, she was from Alaska, and where she had, a lot of the areas where she'd worked, she said there was just kind of this vibe that you can't really be a real social worker, and if you don't hold to certain political values because of the Code of Ethics and so forth. And she asked that question, and it was this great discussion, and there were a number of really interesting responses. You can imagine, you ask a question like that, you're going to get a lot of engagement. And sure enough, there was, and so I I posted a few thoughts, and a few months later, somebody reached out to me and said, hey, I saw what you wrote on there. I kind of like that. And I thought, man, is that thing still alive? That listserv is still going? And it was, and I went back, and sure enough, there was a lot of content in there to read and to catch up on. It was literally about 3 months that thread stayed alive. And then in November, the NASW Press acquisitions editor reached out and asked if I would be interested in writing a book. I said, well, we talked it through and ultimately came up with a proposal that we would not necessarily write a political, ideological book, but a book on viewpoint and political diversity in social work and how we can engage people across the political spectrum. So it's not necessarily partisan, but how do you engage somebody? And I thought that was really interesting that one of an individual stood and talked to Juju Chang, and he asked that question. Juju, why do Republicans think this way? Or, why are they like that? And does anybody remember her response? It's because she didn't have a response. So we hope to answer that question today as to how do we engage people across the political spectrum, so that we're not necessarily having to take a vacation depending on who's in office, and how we can engage people more effectively. So I have a co-editor of this work. His name is Xander Kaag. Do any of you know Xander Kaag? See what these awards do. Xander was the 2020 NASW Social Worker of the Year. All right. So, whoever it is this year, just know that it might feel good for a little bit, but don't forget you. So, and I would tell Xander that, you forgot. And of course, he didn't get to come to the shindig here and have receive it in person. COVID kind of took care of that. But Xander and I have been working on this project together for a little bit, and I mean, you look at me and, you can probably guess some of the things or wonder about, some of my identities and so forth. And well, Xander is a transgender male, has worked for the VA. He does a lot of work. He calls it meso social work, doing trainings for different organizations on transgender issues. And so Xander and I, some of us consider us a little bit of an odd couple. We presented last year to the Alamo chapter in Texas and talked a little bit about that. They tried to pit us as kind of a conservative white guy and a liberal trans guy, but ultimately, I mean, we just kind of recognized that that didn't really work. I mean, we just, the more that we dialogue, the less we kind of get into these ideological identities and so forth. So there are some things that I think over the last few days we've heard that I think kind of laid the groundwork for our discussion today. Obviously, as I mentioned, Reverend Dr. Barber yesterday, he stated America needs more social work. He also said you can't change systems unless you know how it works. And I think we can't change, we can't influence unless we know the system. Similarly, if we understand how different political ideologies in the United States work today, we can be more effective influencers to people across this political spectrum. One of our other contributors are folks in Texas. And one of the things that they've done in the NASW chapter in Texas is they've built bridges and developed relationships with the legislature, with some of the key influencers there, and so they're part of this project as well. Mitt, she shared a few things this morning. She said we need to not see things in terms of red or blue. We need to focus on the issues. We need to focus on what it is that we're trying to influence. There were just so many things that I think we could address if we wanted to. So to understand, our population here, we're gonna just show you this little QR code, and if you can pull out your phone, and we just invite you to take a little anonymous quiz here. It's only not a quiz, it's a poll. It's 4 questions. I hope you can get it to work. But let's just take a few seconds and go ahead and see if you can get your phones to work and take this poll. Help us understand a little bit about our audience, and please be, just be you. There's no expectation that we define ourselves in any way, but we'd be interested to get your take here.
I'm gonna out myself and say, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me?
Oh, sure.
Like I don't
Okay,
know
so
the
go to
kind-
your phone, turn on your phone.
Okay, yep.
All right, and then take a picture.
Okay, I did that part.
Right.
Then what happens?
Okay, so take that. Oops.
There should be a link that shows it.
I wonder if there's got to be a setting on your phone that I don't know about.
Okay.
Does anybody know Androids?
If you use the camera and get close enough, it should frame
Okay.
it.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go. QR code right there. Oops.
I went to a restaurant last night and the waiter handed us a menu and it had that on it. And
Oh, yeah?
I said, no, I can't do that. So they got us a real one.
Oh, mercy. You're,
I haven't.
Mine did.
did it work for others?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll
Well,
try the other one.
okay. Give it a go. There you go.
Okay.
Oh, right up there.
Oh,
There you go.
Thanks so much.
Hey, you betcha. Okay. So we get to learn a little bit about
Yeah.
QR codes now, right?
yeah.
Okay, so while you're doing that, while she's working on that, I'm going to. Oh, I'm not connected to the internet. Unfortunately. Okay. Well, that's all right. I'll
I know what I'm gonna do there. Do you need to get connected?
What's that?
Do you need to?
You can connect this there?
Yeah.
That would be great. Okay. Omni meetings, awesome. Wow. Okay, very good. Okay, very good. All right, so now we pull this out, and here's our population for us right here. No response. Oh, there we go. So 23 responses. 95% of you have had awkward or uncomfortable political conversations. Isn't that interesting? Well, hopefully we can help here. All right, so of those, which of the following social work values are the most important? Service. Service wasn't all that important, I guess, so that's all right. Nobody said service. Social justice got 30%. Dignity and worth of the person got 21. A few of us, one said human relationships, a little bit of integrity, a little bit of competence. 8 of you said, about 34% said none. All right, hey, we're growing here. This is good. So it looks like a tie between social justice and none. They're all of equal importance. And then which method is most effective to bring about political change? Looks like nobody thought activism or protest, but advocacy, dialogue, and any means necessary. Okay. And then on the political spectrum, where do you place yourself? We have quite a few very liberal. We have so about 70%, 75% are very liberal or liberal, and then some others here. So slightly liberal, moderate, and then looks like we have a conservative person here with us. So welcome. That's great. Okay. So interestingly, I often feel like an outsider in the social work world, and I can see both sides of many views. This is very cool. Let's get active and stop sitting silent as our nation is in turmoil. Amen. Where's the change agents? Now is the time, right? The time is right to depolarize. What are we doing today about road versus way? Good question. Very important what we do is all we can to overcome the extreme polarization through dialogue, but not give up the political energy to affect social justice. That's difficult to balance. Oh man, what a great comments. So thank you for sharing those thoughts and those comments. Let me share if I can here. Just a few of our objectives and some of the things that Brandy and I hope to bring about and discuss today, kind of set a little bit of a roadmap for us. Okay. So first, we want to learn to engage all the values within the Code of Ethics. We might have a favorite. We might have one that we tend to focus on, one that brought us into the profession, but we want to make sure that we address them all. The second objective is that we recognize and appreciate the moral foundations of social work values. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute of what that might entail. And then we want to learn to communicate and engage different moral foundations. And then we want to increase awareness and appreciation of these different moral foundations, and recognize your own preferences and your own moral foundations fluency. Of these different moral foundations, you might find that you are more fluent and more comfortable in certain foundations. And then, of course, we want to just be cautious about giving primacy to any particular moral foundation or social work value. We'll turn the time to Brandy now to take it from there.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning. I'm Brandy Shufutinsky. As Matt said, I'm super happy to be here with you all. I haven't been here the whole conference. I actually just came in from Philly, another couple other Philly people here. Another one, look to come and present to you today. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how I came into not just this work, but this specific presentation, and why when Matthew reached out to me, I was super excited to participate and to contribute. So most of my adult professional life, I've worked in the most diverse corporation in the world. Anybody want to guess what that is? No?
Federal government.
Bingo. Not just federal government, the United States military. The United States military is the most diverse organization in the world. You're going to have people from all different backgrounds in every corner of the world coming together to achieve very specific missions. So the idea of what diversity means to me encompasses all of that. It's deeper than how somebody looks on the outside. It's deeper than a political ideology. It's deeper than any one characteristic that make up all of our different identities. So I was super interested and excited to participate in this today specifically, because I think that we've gotten lost. You know, we've kind of gone away from that idea. But social workers are by nature curious. We go into communities that may be completely different from those that are familiar to us, and we work with individuals who come from completely different backgrounds than us to achieve a specific mission. And it's important that we're able to continue to do that. So imagine I have a client come in. She's been a victim of domestic violence. She wants to figure out how to stay with her partner who's been abusing her. Is it my role to tell her, no, according to this, you have to do A, B, and C, or do I have to consider all of the things that may contribute to her safety? And so, again, thinking about what it means to have viewpoint diversity is super important to me, not just as the moral foundation, even though it is, but also, I mean, ultimately because of safety. with the clients that I've worked with. So, going from there, I'm gonna see if I don't mess this up because I have an apple. Okay. I'm gonna put all of them up there at once. So the profession of social work is rooted in balancing both the focus of individual and societal well-being, holding those in balance, not putting one over the other. We have to consider both. Empowering people to address their own needs. If we take the lead in telling somebody what they're supposed to do, according to our preferences, are we really practicing social work? Or do we need to be able to give people the tools and access to the resources so that they can make their own decisions and be empowered themselves? And then considering both context and the complexity of the human experience. There's a reference here for social workers to emphasize working with people to recognize and meet their own needs. So in this way, and many others, social work shapes and follows American philosophy and culture. Although many in our field suggest the universality of privilege, the code highlights the importance of context. So in other words, privilege may exist, but it can't be considered in absence of context. And I'll give an example. Anyone ever been to the grocery store? And I'm 5'7" now, but most of my life I was like the shortest person in the room. I had a growth spurt. And seeing somebody short trying to reach something on top. Okay, so somebody tall in that context may have privilege in being able to reach something and access there. Any parents in the room? Other parents? Anyone lose anything under the couch and so you ask your kid to get it either because they're small or their knees are horrible? In that context, the kid has privilege. Context matters. So looking at the purpose of the Code of Ethics, it's crucial that we acknowledge that social work doesn't privilege any one social work value over the other, including social justice. Of course, in current times, and as the poll indicated, many of us feel that, social justice should be privileged as the most important value, but our Code of Ethics actually says otherwise. So getting to social justice. It's defined here, and it ensures that social workers not only focus on social change, but on equal access to information, services, and resources, allowing individuals to meet their own needs. Anybody want to say why that part is important? You know, teach a man to fish instead of giving him a fish. Why is that important for social workers? Why is that important for us?
Self-determination.
Bingo. Anyone else? Any other ideas?
It's not like we're gonna be with our clients forever. So why plan for it?
Yeah.
And maybe the change would be sustained.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
The change would be sustained more.
Yeah, sustainable change.
Okay.
So it's important that we don't ignore that according to the code, social justice emphasizes equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcome. I believe this is because our field recognizes agency, choice, and empowerment. And those are key, and making sure that we highlight what that actually means and how we can put that into practice is important for all of the reasons that you just said, and I'm sure many, many, many more. So you'll notice here that there are attributes that are typically associated with those left of center. They're in blue, and in a couple slides you'll see those associated with those who hold right of center political ideas will be highlighted in red. It's important, however, to pay attention to the fact that there's no hierarchy in which attributes are the most important. So here, when we think about inequities or acknowledging personal privilege, we associate those with more liberal or left-leaning political ideologies. And they're important. It's not that those things aren't something that we have to consider and pay attention to as social workers, but we also have to contextualize it. Again, how I mentioned about privilege, what does that mean? Well, it depends on the context. And here, the ones highlighted in blue are sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and immigration status. The two highlighted in red are political belief and religion. So, I'm sure if you've been a social worker working in community, working on policies, there are certain things that kind of tug at your heart if they're what you think they're the most important things to you. You're doing that work. What do you do when you encounter somebody at work, a client? you're working with an organization that holds divergent political beliefs. There are people that are in those communities have different religious practices and beliefs. We see it today, so Roe v. Wade. There's a group of young people downstairs with their shirts on that are here, that are, I forgot what it said, it's like we're the
future is anti-abortion.
there's that.
Pro-life generation.
Yeah. So if one of those kids, they were kids, the ones that I saw, I didn't see adults. But if they're coming to you and they need help in work and you hold different political beliefs, different religious and spiritual practices, what do you do as a social worker? How do you work in policy and in practice with those who hold different beliefs than you, and some different beliefs that are obviously hot button issues right now, not just because we're in a politically charged environment, but because they have real world consequences. And these are just things that we have to consider and how we actually put them into practice as social workers.
Listening is always
Please say it louder.
listening.
Yeah.
That is how I engage clients who believe differently or feel differently than me, is listen to them. They tell you what they need.
And why is listening such an important thing to put into practice as a social worker?
Well, as a clinical person, listening is part of what I do. But if you take me out of a clinical session, it's a clinical place, and you're actually we're having a dialogue. If I don't listen to you, you are not going to listen to me. So that's what the dialogue is about.
Yeah. Yes.
And you can listen for areas that you all have in common. Some common thread that might connect you with your client or your family member or
Yeah. Listening humanizes the other person. It humanizes them. They're more than an issue. They're more than their political belief. They're more than their outward appearance. It humanizes them. And that's one of the reasons I believe in clinical practice. That's one of the things you do, so you can listen and hear for that humanity, and then you're better able to work with the person that you're working with. So I'd like you to consider your ethical responsibilities as a professional social worker, to not practice, condone, facilitate, or collaborate with any form of discrimination on the basis of these things. So thinking about what it means to work with and for those who hold different identities, political beliefs, and spiritual practices than you hold. We need to not only think about how this impacts our thoughts, but our actions, and how we advocate for individuals, communities, and policies, and still uphold our social work ethics. And which I think in the poll, we kind of discussed it a little bit about what you think ethics, ranking the ethics of which ones are most important. But if you were gonna look at all of these forms of identity, and you had to rank them in order of importance, which one would you think is most important not to discriminate a client on? So how many think race or ethnicity? What about national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity? What about age or marital status? Political belief, religion, immigration status, mental or physical ability? Okay, so most everybody kept their hands down. Why?
Everything.
They all are. So when we think about, though, how it's in practice, do you believe that we're upholding the profession to this standard? Or can we do better?
We could do better and better.
Yeah. What I tell myself at the gym. So social and political action require us to broaden access for individuals and communities. I think that there's this idea, and Matt said it, was mentioning it before we got started, because there's this tension between whether social work can be political work. And I think most social workers believe that social work is political work, but there's a distinction between political work and partisan work. And I think making sure that even if we're doing political work and we're working on policy or we're advocating for a particular issue, that it doesn't necessarily have to become partisan, and maybe it's our responsibility to ensure that it doesn't. Viewpoint and political diversity are instilled into the code, ensuring ideological differences are not barriers to social work. So if I were to ask somebody, please give me a definition, what does viewpoint diversity look like? Oh, yeah, we have noise in the back. What does viewpoint diversity look like? What does it mean to you?
I guess engaging and appreciating all different thoughts and perspectives.
It's giving everybody a seat at the table.
For me, it's starting where the person is at.
Anyone else? So these standards don't only relate to how social work is practiced, but also who can engage in the work. There are some who believe that social workers must have specific ideological and political beliefs. They're wrong. Social work standards indicate that the profession should not be dominated by a single ideology. And I think that, we did a poll, and just because we have this standard where, anyone and everyone should be able to become a social worker regardless of their political or ideological lean. We know that certain professions attract certain people with certain beliefs. So the poll showed, majority of people in this room fall somewhere on the spectrum of liberal. What does that mean, though, if we institutionalize the idea that you can't be a social worker if you're not liberal? And I pose this question because I think about not us in this room who are social workers, but the people we work with and for. Imagine going and trying to work on an issue that is so personal, that has caused you so much trauma, so much harm, and you know that the person you're going to help you professionally is going to, or you feel like they're going to judge you because you hold a different ideological view. If we are all the same in the profession, if we all hold the same ideology, how in the world will we serve the individuals and communities that we work with and for with all of the differences that they hold?
Thank you, Brandy. So you can see that although many of us lean left, there's clearly political and viewpoint diversity is enshrined into the Code of Ethics. Even though our application of the code might appeal to perhaps more to the Democratic Party, the Democrat Party today, there are also ways that we can increase our fluency and appeal to people with say Republicans a little bit more effectively. And one way that we might be able to do this is to understand the moral foundations theory and how it may apply to the Code of Ethics. Are any of you familiar with moral foundations theory? With Dr. Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T is the way you spell that. He wrote a book, it's called The Righteous Mind, if you're interested in that. And he is a social psychologist at New York University right now. And he, in 2007, he was at a conference much like this. And he's like many of us, he's been just a lifelong liberal. He definitely identifies as leaning left, and he was at this conference with these social psychologists in 2007 in Memphis. And they got together, probably like many of us did, after for drinks and discussion. And he and these other social psychologists noticed that at this conference, about 90% were lean liberal. And and they started to talk a little bit about the dangers of a profession being ideologically dominated, specifically some concerns about seeking the confirmation bias and some of the different challenges that can come when you only have one view in the room. And there are lots of jokes about conservatives and George Bush at the time, and That seems like so long ago, but you know, just lots of those things. And so what he and these other social psychologists decided to do was Dr. Haidt, Jonathan Haidt, he published and developed this Moral Foundations questionnaire. And on the Moral Foundations questionnaire, he and a graduate student had worked on this project, and they had identified 5 different moral foundations. And one of the things that they decided to do was take this Moral Foundations questionnaire, and they decided to put it in the form of a website. And so they got it onto a website, and he was subsequently, you know, they got pretty quick approval from he was at the University of Virginia at the time. They got approval by their IRB folks to do some research, and you know, the website goes live, and they start getting 10 or 11 responses a day, so their sample size is growing pretty nicely. And then he got interviewed by the New York Times, and about what constitutes morality and different morals and so forth. And what do you think happened? Yeah, the sample size exploded, because this website, yourmorals.org, was published. And if any of you haven't been there, it's kind of an interesting experience to go there and do take some of the surveys and see how they respond. And what they found was that political leaning correlates with different moral foundations. And what they essentially, at the time, they'd identified 5 moral foundations, subsequently discovered a 6th. And so what are these moral foundations? Well, the first is care versus harm. All right, and so the degree to which you're concerned about caring for people around you, for the disenfranchised, the marginalized, the oppressed. Fairness, trying to ensure that there is equal rules or equal guidelines, or equal for some people that's equal outcomes. Next is loyalty, so there's a relationship emphasis. And then authority, that there's order in the world, or there's a pattern, there's rules that we live by. And then the 5th one was sanctity, that there are things that are sacred. There are things that are very important to certain people, and for some people that's a religious identity. For others, there's just things that evolve in what is sacred. Finally, and it wasn't in their initial version of the Moral Foundations questionnaire, but they subsequently found a 6th moral foundation. Anybody want to guess what it might be?
Political ideology.
You would think, wouldn't you? It's liberty. It's liberty. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say meaning.
Meaning?
Yeah.
Close. I thought you were going to say liberty, right? Very good. Yeah. So, but meaning, obviously, and you can find meaning in each of these. I think that's really important. Is that meaningfulness, depending on what you find meaningful, you'll see kind of how that plays out. So I want to share with you a chart from The Righteous Mind where he identified the slope and the outcome, and how these correlations play out. What you'll notice is that there are only 5 at the time. So the care foundation, fairness foundation, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. So this here is the sanctity foundation. Those who lean very liberal, they didn't endorse the items on the moral foundation questionnaire for sanctity. It was the lowest amongst the liberal sample. And then authority and loyalty were also relatively low. But where are, as liberals, if you identify as liberal, you're more likely to identify care and fairness. And a certain type of fairness, it's fairness that involves equality of outcome. So what we sometimes refer to as equity. Interestingly, what they found with conservatives is that the conservative folks typically had, obviously their strongest moral foundation is that of authority or order, kind of a social order. And then sanctity was next. And then you can see loyalty, meaning that relationship orientation, and care and fairness, while lower, they were still relatively high. And so what he noticed was that the slope for the liberal profile slopes down going left to right. The slope for the conservative is that there's relatively not much of a slope, because there is that they do kind of concentrate, especially the just what you would call maybe not the very conservative, but just the stronger conservatives. Any comments or questions about this? Yes.
So I see the convergence. Could you speak to where those lines do converge? Would
Yeah.
there be the common ground?
Yeah, so the convergence is just where those five,
Yeah.
it's where all five, that's what he identified. See what he had done, he approached the Charlottesville Democratic Party with some social psychology, trying to figure out what's wrong with Republicans, how can we get more people to vote Democratic? And what he learned from his research is that, well, the reason that conservatives may have a little bit, why does conservatism persist? It's because of that very issue right there. That they have they're engaging 5 different moral foundations, where those who lean liberal oftentimes engage 2. And so by having more of these moral foundations that they're engaging, it actually creates more of a population base for them. So what implications might this have for us as social workers? Well, that's what we want to talk with you about. Is it that there's this liberal moral matrix where, again, care and harm, liberty and repression, and to some degree fairness and cheating, but notice the liberty, when they added that 6th foundation, they found that was very important to the liberal constituency as well. But the most sacred value was care for victims of oppression. You can imagine, right? Whereas the social conservative moral matrix, it just, if you look at their most sacred value, it's to preserve the institutions and the traditions that sustain a moral community and a certain definition of moral community, right? Okay, very good. Yes?
Do you know how many people have completed this measure, and what are the sizes of the 6 categories?
Yeah, so when, this was 2011, so now, I mean, this sample is much larger, but I think it was 132,000 respondents after that New York Times story. So the sample size is huge.
Do you know the sizes of, how many people chose each one of the 6 categories?
I don't know that. Right. So just think about these six values. And let's go through the Code of Ethics just very briefly. And when you think, we'll do a little free association here. Now you've seen the six moral foundations, all right? And when you think of this element of the code, here's where I think we have the moral foundations theory provides empirical support, I believe, for the NASW Code of Ethics. Because you can see moral foundation, I believe you can see these moral foundations that support these different principles in the code. So, free association time here. When you think this principle of service, which social work value or values come to mind? Yeah, wouldn't you agree? There's care. All right. Social justice.
Liberty.
Okay, liberty. Somebody said care. Anything else?
Fairness.
Beautiful. So you can see again just how these moral foundations provide, again, some support for that. What about the dignity and worth of the person? Yeah. Yeah. Care, fairness,
Equality.
liberty.
Equality.
Yeah. And I would say sanctity. And this is something that when you're talking about the Roe versus Wade, this is why there's so much intensity around this issue, is around the sanctity of life, compared with the sanctity of agency. I mean, that's where there is such a strong conflict, is two things that we feel, that a lot of people feel very strongly about, especially in our culture. Individual agency and choice is extremely important, and of course life itself. So the importance of human relationships, which would you say? Loyalty. There you go. That's the first time that one kind of showed up, right? So care, fairness, loyalty, as well as sanctity. If you see relationships as sanctity, if you see family relationships specifically, or family blood as sacred, that the family is sacred. Yes.
Could you, similarly to loyalty, put confidentiality?
So in terms of a social work practice, confidentiality is a practice principle. We're just talking a little bit about the broad social work values that guide things like confidentiality. So confidentiality is important. Well, think about that. What are the moral foundations that undergird confidentiality? Care. Exactly. Care, but also order. It's not anybody else's business. There is order. There are boundaries around this, around confidentiality. So again, moral foundations really do apply to many of the practices that we engage in. Yeah, and so confidentiality is not one of the values, but it's one of the practice, the principles. Obviously, I think integrity applies to all six. That all six of them would be relevant. What about competence?
Authority.
Yeah, if you are competent, you develop the authority to do the work that you do. You have authority. To the degree that we are competent as social workers, it enhances our authority, our credibility, if you will, and of course care as well. So I want to share with you just a video about, and this is a little bit interesting, and just heads up, there are some things in here that you I think will find objectionable. Just be aware of that. But there was here at the mall, at the Washington Mall, there was in 2017 there was the Mother of All Rallies. Anybody heard of that before? 1,500 Washington, D.C. police officers were put on high alert to be ready to activate, because it was messy. I mean, these are Trump supporters who were rallying on the Washington Mall. And any of you know somebody named Hawk Newsom? Anybody know who that is? Hawk Newsom, he was there representing Black Lives Matter. Hawk Newsom is the president of the New York chapter of Black Lives Matter, and they invited him to give this little speech, and they were going to give him 2 minutes, and they kind of get in some digs, and he digs a little bit back, but listen, if you can kind of get through the digs and all the objectionable stuff, listen to how effectively Hawk engages these people, these ideologically different people, and the outcome as he appeals to different moral foundations. Just watch what he does here. All right.
Let him come on up. Let him come on stage with the black man.
All right.
Let Black Lives Matter I'm gonna let Black Lives Matter come up here while I show them what patriotism is about, all right? We're gonna show them that we love them too. We love them too. They wanna get their spotlight, I'm gonna let them get their spotlight on my spotlight. How about that?
Wow. You've got
a
black Trump supporter who has invited Black Lives Matter onto the stage. Look at this.
All right, so you guys know that the mother of all rallies was to end the political violence. It's about freedom of speech. It's about celebration. So what we are going to do is something you're not used to, and we're going to give you 2 minutes of our platform to put your message out. Now, whether they disagree or agree with your message is irrelevant. It's the fact that you have the right to have the message. Just like all of them have the right to their message. Can you hear me? My name is Hulk Newsom. I am the president of Black Lives Matter New York. I am an American. And the beauty of America is that when you see something broke in your country, you can mobilize to fix it. So you ask why there's a Black Lives Matter? Because you can watch a black man die and be choked to death on television and nothing happened. We need to address that. Yeah. You need to fix it. So I said that I am an American. Secondly, I am a Christian. Yeah. I don't think my Bible is any different from yours when it says love thy neighbor. It didn't say that neighbor had to be from the continental United States. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We love one another. The reason why we fight is to draw attention to issues and to fix it. We are not anti-cop. We are anti-bad cop. We said if a cop is bad, he needs to get fired like a bad plumber, like a bad lawyer, like a bad fucking politician. Okay, so if that happens, it needs to be addressed. We don't want handouts. We don't want anything that's yours. We want our God-given right to freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When I say I'm African American, I mean both. Get that through your heads. Listen, I want to leave you with this. I want to leave you with this, and I'm gone. You're right, my brother. You're right. You are so right. All lives matter, right? But when a black life is lost, we get no justice. That's why we say Black Lives Matter. Listen, if we really want to make America great, we do it together. USA! 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 God created this country for all of us. God created this country for all of us. Not because of your color, because we are Americans.
It kind of restored my faith in some of those people, because when I spoke truths, they agreed. I feel like we made progress. I feel like two sides that never listened to each other actually made progress today. Did I expect to go on that stage? No. A man who controls a 4,000 member militia shook my hand and said, I always knew I identified with you, but today solidified it. Wow. One of the heads of Bikers for Trump came up and shook my hand, asked me to take a picture with his son. Little blonde head kid named Jacob, like an enemy to someone they wanted to take pictures with their children. That's the power of communication.
What'd you think? What'd you notice?
Really good.
He came in speaking their language, but he knew how to make, the points to make that they would agree with, so they could listen to the other things he had to say.
That's right. He spoke in a way that they could hear.
He touched on the convergence of all the graph you showed.
Mhm.
He was in convergence.
Yeah. If you wanna reach, you can't just speak in care and fairness. That'll work to some degree, but you gotta be able to speak those other languages. Yes?
Part of me is a little uncomfortable, and just for myself, that I almost felt like someone was being tokenized within the context. And I just want to say that out loud. And I have mixed thoughts, Bob. I'm not saying that's
Sure.
absolutely what happened, but my stomach just kind of it feels a little bad.
Yeah. Or do you feel like he's being tokenized right here, right now?
No, in this video.
Okay, gotcha.
The man was being tokenized within the context. It
Sure.
just makes my stomach upset.
Sure. Yeah, you don't want him to be used, you want him to be exploited, but seeing the outcome, where that went, did that mitigate any stomach acid for you?
I'm also a very moody guy, so.
Okay, all right. Self-awareness is a good thing.
I have a lot of different thoughts. It's really interesting to think about this.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts anybody wanted to share? Yes, ma'am.
Despite what he said about not expecting to go up on the stage,
Yeah.
he was very careful to say things that people would find very hard to refute.
Right. Common ground, really did. Did you have a comment, ma'am?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of piggyback what the gentleman said in the back. I had the same kind of reaction where like I'm watching this and I'm like, okay, I have like this pit in my stomach, like what are these feelings? And so I had to sit with myself and be like, what about this is making me uncomfortable? And it kind of was, I felt like he was a token, but at the same time, when I like realized what the outcome was, I realized like this is what we need more of. We need more of the ability to go into these rooms and these spaces and kind of speak, like you said, like their language. So like I'm very high on like the care, the fairness, but I'm extremely low on like authority, right? And so I don't know how to speak that language. But seeing how he was able to make it universal, like these are universal problems, right? These are not just, some of these are very specific to the Black community, but some of these are also very universal. And so being able to speak that universal language, especially after hearing the Reverend yesterday, is like that's what we need. We need to be able to kind of speak this universal language, so everyone to in order for all of us to come together and kind of talk about.
Wouldn't you say that's social work?
Yeah.
That is social work. that ability to share that language. Okay, got a few more comments, then we'll move on. Yes, ma'am.
I was gonna say that like it's hard for me to watch this stuff too because I feel like we're talking about people being murdered versus like what is the alternative to this? And that's why I don't like I am about free speech. I agree with that. But I hate that like every value should be respected and heard. No, like that's not, I don't agree with that. Like, we're talking about people being murdered by cops. You don't have a right then to say, well, all lives matter. Or like, oh, we don't care about that. Like I feel like that's what angers me so much is like these are not equal opinions. These are not like fair and balanced views. One is about not killing people. And I don't even know what the other group is. Like, I don't even know.
Gotcha.
On guns, I don't know.
Okay, very good. Yes.
I really respect him for going into that environment and having that kind of dialogue. My belief is that nothing's going to change until we actually have a dialogue and talk to each other, because the way it seems now is we talk past each other.
Amen.
Or talk at each other.
Yeah.
And to me, I know it's a controversial view, but we don't have the luxury of separatism in this country anymore.
Right.
We have to engage.
Right.
Because it's a political dead end.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, 2 more comments and then we'll move on. Yes.
Similarly, I really felt like his presence provided an opportunity for people to experience something different, to hear another's point of view, as opposed to always getting their point of view regurgitated to them over and over again. And I think that they saw that if you listen to what people have to say, no matter how it's framed, like you're gonna learn something from it. And hopefully that'll open your mind to change.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, just real short. The fact that guy asked him to just do that like on the spot to come speak, he was prepared. And
Yeah.
the man was prepared, he was prepared beforehand.
Yep.
To do it for him in order to get up there. So it showed he had the education about what, all of the context and the background. And then also, he showed that to fix it, he said we gotta mobilize.
Yeah.
And that's what Dr. Barber was saying yesterday. So there was
Right.
something about that part.
Very good. And I want to mobilize. We're gonna leave today and I'm gonna give you a little something to invite you to do something about what we're talking about here, okay? Reginald, I noticed you had a comment before we move on.
So, I do a lot of this back at home. I am co-founder and past president of Black Lives Matter Mississippi.
Yeah.
So, I do a lot of this. I talk to everybody. And, the questions I have and trying to figure out is, often, even as Black people, we have to enter spaces learning everyone else's language.
Yeah.
When no one comes to our community to speak the language that we speak.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out, there's only so much conversation and discussion that can be had until 2 more people are here.
Right.
Exactly. What is that next step in order to, galvanize and mobilize people together? Aside without, from my standpoint, we're always taking the first step, but we're still getting pushback. So,
Thank you, Reginald. Very well said. Thank you. All right, so, one more comment then we'll move. This is the last time, I promise. Y'all keep your hands down.
Sorry, I'll be quick, but I was just gonna say that is a real thing that should be pointed out, that sometimes it's hard, having to be the bigger person all the time, and take that, basically, be the one to speak, because how everyone else was saying, real people are, real people are being killed, and sometimes, there's fatigue and trying to be the bigger person. So,
yeah.
I just wanted to say that that's I don't know, a real thing that
absolutely
should be acknowledged.
It is the real deal. Absolutely. These things do matter. And he really made a difference by speaking up, by being prepared, by knowing his audience and understanding a little bit about them. And I hope that we can do the same as a result of the project that we're working on in our discussion today. So we're going to now turn the floor back to Brandy to share a little bit about a model that might help in facilitating some of our work.
I actually want to say this is actually a great example of viewpoint diversity, because that video left me feeling like you mentioned too. But I think I pinpointed why. I can't remember if it was before the last presidential election or if it was after Secretary Pete Buttigieg was appointed in the Biden administration, but he went on Fox News consistently. Actually, one of the very few Democrats to do that. And I remember me feeling like, good, that voice needs to be heard in that audience. And that made me feel better, but that could also be because I may be more politically aligned with him than this video. So I just wanted to point out that difference, that the people that are maybe more aligned with, left of center politics were really happy to see that. But this was uncomfortable, and vice versa. So anyway, I will move on. So looking at there are 3 emphases that I'm going to go over on approaches to social work. This first one is the collectivist emphasis, and it goes from left to right, focusing at the top, so the nation, all the way down to the individual. So from nation to state to municipality to interest group or faith community to family to individual. And I'll come back to this, but I want to go to the individualist emphasis that goes the opposite direction. So everything starts with the individual, goes to the family, to the interest group, to the municipality, to the state, to the nation. And I want to bring these 2 emphases into current events, and what better day than today with what happened with the Supreme Court. And what happened yesterday with the Supreme Court with gun legislation in New York. I think that those are, I was going to use a different example, but let's start with those ones. So when we look at the collectivist emphasis, there's this focus that what's good on the macro level, on the national level, will make it down to be good for the individual. And we have the opposite emphasis, the individualist emphasis saying the opposite. What's good for the individual will make its way up and be good for the nation. So 2 great examples: gun legislation that just came out of the Supreme Court, where the ruling was the national level, the Supreme Court, highest court in the land, could determine individual, state, municipality, local governments' controls on gun legislation. Same court, opposite ruling today with Roe v. Wade. So the example I was going to use was schools, because the field that I work in is education. So looking at, if we're going to look at an individualist emphasis, we look at where there's a highlight on making national standards for education in schools. Public schools, less local control. If we look at the individualist emphasis on education, we want local control over schools, local standards. So 2 examples on how those have manifested. One, I can't remember what year it was. I mentioned I've worked for the military, as part of a military family for over 20 years. So I've lived all over the United States. I've spent about 8 years living in Hawaii. There was a national test that students in Hawaii took. One of the things they had to do was to draw a house. They drew it. All of those students got marked off on the same flaw in their drawing. Anyone guess what they didn't draw? A chimney. A chimney. A national, most homes, there are some places, obviously it gets cool in Hawaii, and there are some homes with chimneys. Homes in Hawaii don't have chimneys, they didn't draw a chimney. The national standard that this is what a house should look like didn't really work out that well for students in Hawaii. Another example, local control over schools. What's one thing that's a hot button issue that taught in schools between people that may be right of center politically and people left of center politically? Bathrooms is one, what else? Sex ed. CRT. Those are all things. I'm just gonna throw out science. So if you're in a community, not in any way. If you're in a community that's more faith-based, there's the argument to teach creationism alongside of evolution or in place of evolution, right? There is. So if you think of, okay, local control, if schools are only controlled locally and they're in a very religious community where they want to teach creationism instead of evolution, what are those kids missing then when they go out into the broader world and perhaps leave that community? Partially. So you can see how it can work. Again, always go back to context matters, because you see failures in both. So I always love to take the centrist emphasis because it focuses highly on context, to where everything is kind of interrelated. There isn't a hierarchy on what's most important. It depends. If you have a client that's coming to you and they need help getting food, do we necessarily need a national policy to feed that client? Maybe the local synagogue has a food bank. Mine does. Maybe they have family members that they can get back in touch with and can come bring over a car full of groceries, right? It's thinking about context. And I think that it's really easy in a highly partisan environment to lose sight of context. It doesn't mean that that we don't take political steps and that we don't advocate for certain things policy-wise, but it needs to be contextual. All right. So, ideological, here.
Here, I'll just.
You got it?
You want me to?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
So, this is, what we're talking about is trying to create a heterodox group of social workers who can speak with fluency across those moral foundations. There was, I was really inspired by what we saw this morning, but sometimes the PACE sends out messages that are a little bit orthodox. And a few years ago, I got this email from our political action committee, and I just went, just kind of made my stomach churn a little bit, because it was talking, it said that, it's easier to spend a few months and some money electing the right people than to spend years and a lot of money trying to get the wrong people to do the right things. So when we polarize, right versus wrong, you're different than I am, so that's gets to be a little bit self-righteous. I think we have to be careful as social workers that we try and do good things without necessarily being self-righteous in our approach. So a few years ago, I was living in Arizona, and Angelo, Dr. McLean came down and to our chapter awards ceremony one night, and I went and I visited with him just briefly, and I followed up with an email telling him thanks for coming, and told him a little bit about the project that we're working on to promote Viewpoint and political diversity in social work, and he replied, and this was his response. He said, "I like your idea of translating initiatives and ideas into both conservative and progressive principles that allows us to speak to politically diverse influences. We have to reach across the broad political spectrum. For instance, we just learned today that Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, has agreed to sponsor one of our bills." I think that's what's most effective. So I want to, my call to action today, before we have a little bit of time for discussion, and I want to share just a few examples of these things, is I want to invite you to join with us to a group of social workers that we just created, Xander Kagan and myself and a few others. And it's called Pro-Social Work, pro-social. We're not anti, we don't have to be anti anyone. And essentially our three principles are this. They're on my little card here, I'll give you a card. You can't hardly read it because the font's so small. But it's essentially we humanize, we dialogue, all right, and we practice. We practice again and again so that we can become more fluent. But we practice within the context of the Code of Ethics. We don't just do anything. It's not anything goes. We want to make sure that we're practicing within the Code of Ethics and moral foundations. Humanize, dialogue, practice. All right. So here's the QR code. I'm going to give you a card so you can look at more if we need them. But just invite you to please join with us.
Today?
Today. Do it today. Do it today. It's a LinkedIn group right now. So if you haven't joined LinkedIn, it's just LinkedIn is professional networking. I'd encourage you to you can get on it for free. They have this premium thing they always want you to sign up for. They keep trying to deny. But it's just a LinkedIn group so that we can network, so that we can have dialogue, so that we have resources that promote heterodoxy in social work that will help you become more fluent in different principles and seeing different things. Thank you. It will help us approach things in just a little bit more of a politically diverse way, and I hope it'll help us move some of our initiatives and social work agenda through politically. We're running out of time, so I won't necessarily show you this little video, but Hawk talks a little bit about some of the things that he learned. And interestingly, I found this just in preparation for this for this presentation. And what were the lessons he learned? To humanize and to dialogue. Not necessarily, he didn't mention anything about the Code of Ethics, but I'm sure he would if he knew about it. All right. So just some questions to ponder for us to discuss today. Well, and let me just share maybe just a few examples of political diversity, if you will. Are any of you aware of social legislation recently in Florida? Has anybody heard about stories coming out of Florida on a social issue or what that entailed? Some of you are nodding your heads. You remember what it was?
Yeah. Well, what came to mind for me was that it was about transgender providing care for because I'm licensed to do telehealth in Florida. So it's basically saying that I couldn't provide affirming care or give information about any surgical or hormones.
Okay. Very good.
That's considered against the law now.
Gotcha. Okay. Very good. Any other? Yes?
Don't say gay.
The don't say gay. Okay. Very good. Excellent. Have you all heard of that coming out of Florida, the don't say gay?
Yes.
Okay. Have any of you heard of legislation on a social issue coming out of Florida where it did not receive one dissenting vote? Not in the House, 117 to nothing. Not in the Senate, 38 nothing. And good old Governor DeSantis signed it into law. Nobody's heard about this? It was a fatherhood bill. It integrated just what Brandy was talking a little bit about, that centrist approach, where they appealed to government as well as local, as well as family. You know, if you look along the political spectrum, if you will, they used government to support families. So they appealed to those who were very much on the right in terms of local governance, but also appealed to those who have interest in government interests and supports. And so it's this fatherhood bill. And just Google it, take a look at it, the Florida fatherhood bill. When there was a question, you know, the question you answer with, well, let me ask you this. Do you not find that remarkable that happened? When there's a social issue and this bill gets through the Florida, through Florida, not a single dissenting vote. Why is that not a national story?
It won't sound like that, I'm sorry.
So I was tempted, but I obviously I didn't. I wanted to stand and ask Juju, why is this not, you know, why is this not in the news? You know, we have people coming together, figuring some stuff out, you know, and working together. And part of that bill is young adults who grew up in foster care, they got a stipend. There was some real benefits to those who didn't get to enjoy the blessings and benefits of having an involved father in their life. If you go downstairs and look in the posters, somebody's authored a poster on homeless fathers, and fatherhood's really important. If you look at those in the incarceration rates, they're abhorrent for the African American community. But even more, the rates of fatherlessness of those in prison are higher than the racial disparities. Fatherlessness is a huge issue. Florida just went up. So anyway.
Can I just say something?
Yes,
it's
please.
a big issue, but it would really be worldwide news if it was all about women. Because there's something bigger here, about men, everything, men in control, men controlling women. That's a context. Context is very important.
Gotcha.
I totally believe in context.
Gotcha. So you think it would have got
just being from a social work perspective and working in foster care and what we struggle with to get things for mothers.
Yeah.
And so men, all sides agree on this issue. There's so many political ramifications for that as well.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
You gotta dig deeper than just the feel good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very good. Very good. All right. Well, we have a few minutes for some discussion, and so I'd like to maybe just invite you to ponder a few things that might help facilitate some discussion, or if you have other things that you'd like to talk about, that's fine. But the first is there a difference between partisan work and social work, or political work, if you will, and social work? Is there a difference between political work and so partisan work and social work, but what's the difference between political work and ideological work? You can do political work, but if you are only about your ideology, how effective are you going to be? And I think that's what we're seeing nowadays. Is the personal, we've heard this, this comment, Peggy McIntosh, the personal is political. Is it really political, or is it more social? Is it really about power, or is it more about relationships? What's the price of surrendering social work to partisan political work? What happens to us as social workers if we get pigeonholed or defined in a certain way? And does the NASW Code of Ethics give primacy to any of the 6 values? We talked a little bit about that. And then, is there a difference between social justice and social work? And specifically, which brand of social justice? There is a conservative Republican brand of social justice that typically focuses on opportunity, whereas the emphasis from a progressive perspective is equality of outcome. And there might be times and contexts for both of those. So just a few things to consider that. So, thoughts or reflections about this? Yes, ma'am.
I feel very upset today, because we're new, but also the whole country, so I'm already very grand. But
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. You feel very upset today.
Yeah, I'm upset because there's everything happening, and then trying to like be in the moment with this information. But
yeah,
my question is like going back to earlier, and we can stay with Black Lives Matter, because I think that's a good thing to talk about, which is like, how do you reach across a divide when you're saying like, hey, don't kill black people, but the other side is saying, but that's not happening. Like, how do you bridge that gap when that's such a disconnect? And we can talk about Roe v. Wade, like, hey, don't take away my right to have a choice, and the other side is saying, but the fetus that you may have one day should have a more right than you do right now in existence. That, to me, the conversations are so polarized. How do you even reach across when, and why is like, I think you made a really good point that the onus is always on the marginalized group to assimilate to the other group. And it's like, people are dying, but the other group is saying, it's your own fault though, if you just didn't run, or if you just weren't you did everything right, but we're still dying, and we did everything you said us to do. When we protest, that's still not good enough. Like, I feel like the other group, like Black Lives Matter, and black people in the US in general have done everything they could think of with passive protesting the street, everything, and nothing's happening still, like nothing. So I don't know, like how do you?
Well, I would challenge you a little bit on that. Because the narrative, the thing that we tell ourselves is sometimes that stirs us up. And if I could, can I challenge you just a little bit? Would you be okay with that? Is it really true that nothing's happening? I think there's a lot of things happening. I think there's a lot that happened in 2020 where it was not a question whether George Floyd was murdered, right? So I think it's okay to be careful that we don't polarize within ourselves and use kind of extreme language that nothing's happening. Maybe it's not happening.
I'm impatient, so it's not happening fast enough and not enough.
There you go. There you go. But you know what? But look at how many people are here today. Look at how many things we're doing in our communities. Look at what happened, yesterday. There are things that are happening, but you're right. I think you're probably like me. I'm very impatient as well. So, yes, ma'am.
You know what I wanted to say? I feel that I'm here because I have to live it, and you have to live it more than me. I don't know, but I know, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that black people have to, before we walk out of our house, we have to have a guard up. We have to be safe when we step out. It's a different experience. So there is stuff happening, but there's nothing happening because our safety, every day, every second, we have to think about it. So when you don't have to think about it, and you don't have to have that guard up, you don't have to assimilate, and the way you speak, the way you dress, the way you look is a threat to somebody.
Yeah.
Because even when Hawk held that little boy, I think his name
Yes.
was Jacob Jacob.
Yes.
What I thought to myself was, maybe that little boy will now not see us as a threat all of the time.
Yeah.
So it's exhausting, you feel fatigued, and yes, there's stuff happening. But for me as a mom who has a little daughter, I don't worry about her, and I shouldn't have to. We have to have this talk.
I have a question for you.
It's exhausting.
It is. I'm the mother of 4. I have 3 sons and a daughter. You don't have to. I firmly reject the idea that we have to. I did not ever, your body, your choice. I didn't straighten my hair because I don't have to. There are certain things that we can refuse to do as far as conforming. And there's also just the idea that anybody who is in a minority community in a majority population, in some way, shape, or form, has to switch things up, whether that's Black people, whether that's people with certain disabilities, whether that's people with accents, because they don't have an accent back home. So the idea that we don't have to switch depending on our environment, again, context matters, is a false idea anyway. There's a whole freeing thing about the idea of radical independence. It's freeing and liberating. And that doesn't mean that we don't I mean, we live in one of the most diverse countries in the world. Of course there's gonna be conflict. The expectation that there isn't going to be is a false expectation, I think, that sets us up to continue that conflict. We don't have to worry. Should we worry? Yes, of course, life is dangerous. It's not like we live in the safest place in the world. I mean, we see shootings every day, all the time. I'm from Philadelphia. Turn on the local news, it's scarier than CNN. It is, am I wrong? It is. But it's to me, this is the part, and these are the parts that we have control over. You're gonna live in fear, you're gonna live. And I think it's damaging to teach our children to live in fear. Sorry, 5 minutes, quiet.
No, you stand here with me.
So, well, one, thank you for that, because that's kind of how I approach life, is that, you know, you get my locks, you get my tattoos, you know, I presented yesterday and I made sure that, like, I am who I am when I'm presenting. I want to pivot back to, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but back to your comment about, like, how you're impatient and things aren't moving fast enough. And so, and then also going back to what Reginald said, where it's like, you know, I'm tired of, you know, going into these spaces, taking and being the first person to have these conversations and do all this work. And the reason why things are moving fast is because we don't have enough white allies. We don't have enough white social workers willing to put their own safety when it comes to their own whiteness on the line to stand up and have these conversations. And so when I look around the room and when I look in spaces that I'm at, when I'm working with, you know, white social workers, a lot of things that happens is like behind the scenes, but they're not willing to do things up front. And so we can, myself, Reginald, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, Brandy, we can only do so much when we do in the spaces that we're in, but when there's other spaces that we're closed off to, we need our white allies to stand up and say things. And so when we talk about, like, it's not moving fast enough, it's because we need more white allies. And I don't, and yeah, sorry, I was about to go on a whole
evolution is slow.
But,
I mean, evolution
yeah,
is slow.
and so it's like everyone's like, oh, I'm tired, and you know, things are moving slow, and it's like, well, what are you doing to challenge the people that are in your own personal space, but in your workspace, and then, you know, go broader and beyond that. And so, like, that's my life, that's what I do all the time, but it's exhausting, and I need other people to help.
Sure, absolutely. Well, hopefully this is what we want to promote and encourage, is that we do have the ability to speak to different people, you know, in different ways. So, yes, ma'am.
I would just say, I will never discount, right, the importance of dialogue and conversation with people with different ideologies. It's what allows me to work with young white nationalists in some occasions. It's hard work.
Mercy.
But the question, it struck me wrong, Matthew, that you just asked, and maybe it's just my lens on it. Is it about power or is it about relationships?
Yeah.
I think it's the wrong question.
Okay.
I think that's easy for you to ask as a white man who has power, and perhaps you recognize it in ways that other white men don't. But how are you using that power? How am I using my power as a white woman or a lesbian woman, which people wouldn't know unless I said it. In relationship, how are we as white allies using our power in relationship? And I think that's the more important question.
Yeah.
I think there's an underlying question to that. And this isn't a colorblind sameness, because I reject that. I think that I'm reading this fabulous book, The Dignity of Difference, and I think it's important to actually appreciate, like I said, a bigger, deeper diversity. But when I'm working with a client, I don't care what their ethnicity is. I take it into consideration with what they have to face, but a hungry kid's a hungry kid. And my job and responsibility is to feed that kid. So the focus is on the issue, not some identity piece or piece of identity someone holds. When I'm looking at a meso or macro level as far as policy, of course all of those things come into place.
Right. Exactly.
But we, like, it's our job not to only focus on that, we gotta go deeper.
Yeah.
But as social workers, we have to consider why that child is hungry.
That's what I said. That's what I mean when you go there. We have to, but we can't only consider that. We have to consider all of it.
But we have to check check privilege, we have to be mindful of that, we have to be aware, we have to invite, we have to level the playing field so that there can be space for others. I would agree. Yes?
I just want to mention briefly a program that maybe some people heard of or not, Braver's Angels. Braver Angels.
Yeah,
Braver
they're one of our
Angels.
contributors.
And braverangels.org has a website that really explains what they're doing, and they are bringing together red and blue and structured dialogical days together, and you can also do it one-to-one on the internet and so forth. But I found it very moving. I attended a one-day workshop as an observer.
Yeah.
And there's an equal number of reds and blues. And you know, by the end of the day, people were finding where the common ground were around the kind of values we're talking about. So
Correct.
It can be quite transformative. I encourage people to look that up. Braver Angels.
Great, thank you. We just wanna close that we recognize that we've stirred some things up. But what I hope socially can happen is that the space between each of us, between you and whoever, can be one of goodwill, can be one of openness, curiosity, and that we can strive to do social work rather than try and oppress or harm other people. So thank you for being
Oh, okay. Oh, are you in the social work? Oh, okay.
So, they're like recording and I keep standing and I do not like my favorite.
Oh my goodness.
You might be
No, this is the first time that Brandy and I have ever been in the same room together.
We've been in a Zoom room together.
That's right.
Zoom.
This is the first time we've actually ever
Because I
met.
was trying to figure out how, because I saw that there's some people that they do, there's two like people presenting. I was trying to find out whether they go together, or did the organization
No,
them to work like
this
each other?
is all just individual initiative that Brandy was connected to me through Xander. Xander met her
Okay, so
through
there's
the.
somebody connected you. Okay.
Yeah, and it's just reaching out to people and saying, hey, it started on that board and it's just really grown organically, so.
Well, I was in somebody's breakfast, using the table
So that,
yesterday.
so,
It was somebody's exhibit.
in connecting,
I mean, I was that,
Yeah.
with you all through LinkedIn would be a way to.
And he told me,
Yeah,
here, I
yeah.
have, I sat down and I learned, like, all of a sudden, it's a project, and it's his
So,
and then, in the end, I started to talk.
It's professionals with just Viewpoint for it's similar to that, but for social media.
Okay.
And that's a little bit what I mean, like, domestic violence, that those ideology thing. So it's really important to focus on that, so it's more federal social work, it's bigger social work, like a bigger, broader social work case, so we don't only work and talk, but we can interact with all of
So, I'm gonna approach it about, my workshop to see if they can.
There you go. That's social work, Sandra May. That is social work. That's how it happens. You just voice it. You just speak up. Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the comments.
Yeah, please. That, we need social workers everywhere.
Yep. Thank
So
you.
you as president of
Former president and vice president.
okay, I was the,
Matt.
student.
That's Rachel.
government
Oh,
president.
my
goodness.
hostess.
Can I give you a hug?
Yeah,
Oh, mercy.
Hispanic,
Yes.
How are you? And, I got to
not as
work
good as
with
you,
students
but give me
and
some
everything like
hug.
that, and then I just graduated.
Oh, man.
What a day, right? I mean,
Right.
to have your section be right on the
Yeah,
heels
but I'm
of
gonna
your
travel.
Oh,
to
mercy.
That's
see what
a
they're doing.
lot
I'm
to-
gonna
I
travel.
didn't even know.
That's what I'm getting.
That-
You said
I
you're
think
gonna
that's
decide
why the
this
crowd
week.
came in.
I'll be in touch with you.
I think it was Friday, I'm like, it's gonna
So
have
what
to
are you
come out
doing
today.
It is
because,
coming, yeah, you literally just got
Research.
Are you
during
serious?
Rachel Levine's session.
Oh.
It was, so you,
Oh,
so
but you
that,
didn't
I think
research.
that
I was in here setting up, and I didn't even.
So the energy of the people coming into this room was.
I saw it right
deeply
before.
upsetting. Yeah,
But now
yeah,
it's focusing on
they're
us.
organizing, just,
No
I know
wonder.
the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Well, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
you're going over it too.
So, and I'll
Start
Okay,
organizing.
so that's where the nothing's happening.
There's a lot of,
Yeah.
a lot of it.
Oh,
Yeah, you can
mercy.
see the news going across the crowd, everybody's phones are lighting up, it was just a pall.
Well, I came in and saw the
Yeah.
group of kids, and I was like, I mean, I figured it was gonna be today, cause
Yeah.
like they're gonna do it on Friday.
Right, exactly, do it on Friday and then run.
I know, that's all I was thinking.
Just contact me.
Anyway, so yeah, so you got a
It's
tough
easy to
energy
get in
coming
contact.
in.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's interesting. I guess we get to head over to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, okay, where do I avoid? My kids are here, we're gonna
Oh,
go to a
okay.
library, museum or something, but I
Right, yeah.
don't wanna get caught up.
You know, I don't come to Washington very often. Maybe I should take credit for this. The first time I came to Washington was November of 2000. You remember what happened in November of 2000? End of November?
Gore v. Bush.
Oh, Gore v. Bush, of course. Oh,
I was here.
You were here.
I was here for
Crazy.
it. So now I'm
Like
on
never
this
go to
side.
Vegas.
There you go.
Then I hit it off, just.
Oh, mercy.
You doing okay? How are you?
You know what, when you
That's
read
right.
more and
And I
more,
sense
you
it
know,
from you too.
we're still looking.
Yeah, I'm trying, look,
We're
I
still
agree,
looking.
I
So
agree.
if, in fact,
Thank you.
we've got some other contributors that like.
Yeah, maybe I can be part of your research. Because this is the way.
Oh, okay, okay, I'm having a
Okay,
nice
so
day.
he does a lot of DEI work and so
Great,
forth.
Great, yeah.
And so, I mean, we're just trying to find, you know, and make sure we're hitting the right notes and everything else.
Anyway, that's my
It's,
You keep
and-
doing good
well,
work,
and it
and all
is.
the best
I mean, it's
with
been
your
a long,
students.
it's been a long project, but it grows, and so, you know, we just, oh, here we go. So, we have this
Oh,
little
good.
group that
You know what,
we're
I went
forming
around the room,
here.
I didn't take one, there's
Yeah,
only two
there
left,
you
and I
go.
tried to not
There
be
you
greedy
go.
since I'm
There's
an
our little,
employee.
so were you here?
Yeah.
During the presentation? Where
I
were you
was,
sitting?
I sat in the back, I came in at the last minute, cause
Okay.
I go around, well, I was here for 20 minutes.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so what I do is I bop around to the
So
different
you,
sections.
okay, so you got to hear, you heard, because I mean, there was, you know, there was more energy before
And
that.
I'm
you
using
know.
it into my stuff, and I signed with this dollar, and another 5 are public, and I came to Princeton Town in 2020.
Right.
You work in schools.
It's tough.
Um,
It's hard,
you
I mean,
know,
it's
this-
hard,
I was-
it's hard
I
to,
just
it's
graduated
happened to
like
Rachel,
3
when she was
weeks
up on
ago.
stage talking.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
And,
I did.
you know, the crowd
this
doesn't
one-
know what
this
to
one was
do.
with the students.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like,
Part of
okay,
this
I'm
class.
employee, start being, like, do
I do
Angelo
activism,
and
but
Mitch,
this
they
is-
know,
she's
they're
a
up at the
producer.
front, like,
Yeah.
anybody
She
telling
makes big
them.
puppets.
And
I
so
trust them.
it's very, and then the
Interesting
person who
time.
told Avril
That's what I
Lavigne
do.
was actually a
Oh,
person who was
wow.
about to ask a
These
question, she was
dolls,
standing
and
at the
they don't use
mic.
dolls.
And while she's standing there, her phone's blowing up,
Students, they don't
so
know how to
it's,
use school
speakers,
because they
it's very
don't
difficult for
know. They don't-
speakers and
no
no
one
one
told them
does,
this.
so.
It's just
Such
yeah.
a
Talking
messy
about
subject that
It
I'm
is.
presenting here.
It's
Where
a
are you?
subject to begin with, and then, and
Okay.
honest to God, it was one of the first thoughts I had when the Roe decision just came. I was like, oh, that session is right
Right,
after
I
this.
cannot be in one place.
Yeah.
I'm like,
So
that's
the
a lot
dolls
to
are,
take
you know,
on.
they represent those people that they wanna be
Yeah,
social workers.
sure. Yeah.
And also there's the other marginalized,
It is.
visually impaired,
I mean,
gay,
I don't know if you got to
has a
see or hear,
disability.
you know, there was definitely
And,
some.
businessmen
There's some good
and
direction.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, we
like,
definitely need to do
forced
something.
Right, but
Yeah.
I did
And,
work I've done
so
two with
hopefully,
it.
you know,
What
that's
age
what
group?
we're trying to do.
Right.
you know.
Well,
So wait, so you have to tell me about
Well,
this card
the
work.
one- the
So
ones
this
I
So we
is-
just started this little LinkedIn
I
group.
love it, so they
Pro
need to
social work.
graduate
Excellent.
So you can't read this
But I
because
have
it's a lot
taken
smaller than
That's
I thought it
okay,
be,
said,
but
that's
you
all
know,
I said.
humanized
Yeah.
dialogue and
I love that.
practice within the code of ethics.
But,
That's
it just got.
great.
So that's what we're about.
That's
Yeah.
what's happening.
Awesome.
And
There you
then
go.
this one,
So-
and
so-
this one, I put into the, he did, he caught it right off.
It did, okay. I'm getting married.
And I made.
I'm a married woman.
And I made them.
Finally. August 21st.
Oh, wow.
Would you
I
believe
did
we
it
almost got
before
canceled for a
graduating.
third
Yeah.
time?
You got it.
Hurricane Henri hit the area.
That's
And
amazing.
the venue, the wedding the day after ours,
Right.
canceled it.
Okay.
But we missed our Wednesday.
Please
Me
try
in Washington
something
DC.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wedding.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Isn't that unreal?
Lines.
So we're finally
I use
planning
lines
on our
not those
honeymoon, our
flashing
real
lights, but
honeymoon,
yeah,
Really?
next year,
Yeah.
we're gonna
Really?
get to Galapagos.
Stars.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
These two.
I'll
the day
believe it when I'm
before,
down there.
I made
In
them
the
into
Galapagos.
baby turtle. I made
There you
them
go.
into
Well,
They're married nowadays,
Yeah.
they're just cranking up.
Oh, it's
you know.
unbelievable, it's like twice as much when we were first supposed to go,
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Whatever.
If
you-
Okay,
It's gotta
it's
go.
happening, it's happening, we're gonna do
Both
it.
of the legs.
So yes, we're,
Oh,
And
we're
very
we're
good.
moving
doing
them to
okay.
Kenny
Doing
G,
okay.
and they got a standing ovation.
So how's your family?
At the end of.
Doing good.
Yeah?
And also I
Good,
had
yeah.
the thing with
Since
not
we
humidifier,
spoke last,
the
my
thing
second.
used for-
semester,
Oh, the
so
aromatherapy.
we had a
I
wedding.
had that on
Oh,
the
that's
table.
right,
know,
With the lights.
What a
right
wedding.
up
There we
and
go.
it was just- it
So
was
we
a
had,
standing
my
ovation.
first
So I'm
got
just
married
trying to
in
bring
2020.
a little different flavor to
2020.
to my
It was right before the
type.
show.
That's amazing.
And then my second
That's
got
really
married
amazing.
last October.
But,
There you go.
Wow.
Yeah,
My
so
third
that's
is
what-
college.
And did that go on without a hitch?
Thank you for sharing.
You're
You're welcome.
Good, oh, congratulations.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
put
so,
myself
yeah,
on
Oh,
LinkedIn, like
yeah,
I said,
third
because
in
I don't
college.
know.
Third in college.
I'm not
Where
sure
you
what that
going?
is
It's
about,
Anyway.
but it's,
Oh, great.
just
All
professional
right.
networking.
So he's close to us.
It's
My
really
fourth-
fabulous.
Yeah,
It's not
He's
hard.
born premature.
Oh, really?
So
Yeah.
he has some delays. He always catches up. He's a
Okay.
great kid.
Right, just takes a minute.
But he's
Yeah.
probably not gonna do the mission thing like his brothers did. He'll do
Okay.
a service mission where he stays
Okay.
at home and
Oh,
does
great.
community service.
Oh,
and those
nice,
things.
all
Yeah, it's a
right.
different kind of mission.
Oh, that's nice. How old is he?
He's 19.
19, all right, nice, oh.
There you go.
Congratulations on it, marrying
That's
another
right.
one off.
That's right.
It's like, I got all these sons, I got.
You got any daughters?
Exactly, exactly. Looking for daughters. That's wild. No, good for you, that's great.
Yeah, so the project keeps going on. Keeps-
Good.
keeps
How's
growing,
Xander doing? I
keeps
haven't
building.
talked to Xander in a long
Xander's
time.
great.
Good.
Xander's, top notch. I asked if anybody here knew the man.
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
They
I said, well, hey,
did.
so you get your claim to fame, your moment in time, and then, all right.
Right.
We forgot.
That's right, they've moved on. That's
That's right.
funny.
That's
Oh,
right. So we got his
good.
award, 2 years ago.
He did,
and Nobody
yes.
was here, but that was
Right.
too bad.
Yeah, man, this pandemic.
That's right.
Over it.
That's right.
Excellent,
Totally.
so you're staying for the duration?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep,
good,
came in
good, good.
Tuesday. I'll stay till tomorrow. And
Great.
That's right. That's right.
Excellent.
Well, I am so glad.
I'm so happy to see you, Matt. Oh, it's just great. I'm so happy to see your program. I saw it right away when I was looking at. I was like, there he is. He's on the program.
First time.
Yes.
First time. Well, it's the first time I got to meet Brandy as well.
I'm Rachel Myers. I'm the
Hi,
acquisitions editor at the NASW Press.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Rachel,
She's a good
helped me with
kid.
this along.
Oh,
Yeah,
very
we
cool.
worked on this forever.
Yeah,
Oh,
she's
thank
part
you.
of the project.
Thank you.
Yeah.
She reached out and said, hey, would you be interested? And I said, no, not by myself, but, so, then
Yeah.
Brandy, she's one of our contributors.
I love it. That's
Yes,
great.
yes,
All right,
indeed.
you're gonna find a home for it. You
That's
will.
right. Well, and even if not a home, it's coming about in other ways.
Yes.
That's what we realize is maybe
Yes.
before we publish, we need to
Yes.
equalize a little bit.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's a great attitude.
Yeah.
And this is a good place to be doing that.
There you go, man.
I
There you
love
go.
that. I love the diversity of the audience that came. I thought